Hey, real quick before we get started, Content Matters with a Z is our content marketing company that helps entrepreneurs tell their own stories to those who care. And here's the thing, we think every entrepreneur that is willing should have their own content platform. And we want to help make that happen, both by working directly with entrepreneurs and by sharing our own stories, exploring the craft of content marketing. Content Matters, one piece of content at a time. Learn more at kazcontent.com. Welcome to the podcast, Entrepreneur Perspectives, introspective podcast conversations helping build and protect your business one podcast at a time. A KazSource production. In this episode, I chat with John Warrillow, author of the book Built to Sell, about creating a business that can thrive without you. This book was one of the early books I read when starting KazSource. I think about it often, and to have the opportunity to talk with the author, it's an honor. John is the founder of the Value Builder System, a simple software for building the value of a company. John's book, Built to Sell, was recognized by both Fortune and Inc. magazines as one of the best business books of 2011, and it is absolutely a must-read for business owners a decade later. John's newest book, The Art of Selling Your Business, which came out in 2021, is available on Amazon. John is also the host of the podcast Built to Sell Radio. With all that, we welcome John Warrillow. It was interesting, John, because I was looking, as we were talking before we started here, I was looking at your book. I'm like, well, what year was it? I read your book in 2013, and I've gone back to it. And it's 2021. A lot, as you know, has happened over the last couple of years. A lot's happened over the last 10 years, but really things have changed really quickly here.
Yeah, for sure.
If you were to come out with a new edition for Built to Sell, and you had to add a chapter to the book, what would that last chapter be that you would add to the book?
Man, that's a really interesting, because I've done that. Of course, I wrote a book called The Automatic Customer in 2015, which is about recurring revenue, which is really one of the things I did not do a good job of in Built to Sell, was to talk about how do you create recurring revenue. So, and then the last book, the new one, is called The Art of Selling Your Business, and it's sort of the transaction stuff. So how do you kind of punch above your weight? So those would be two chapters that I would probably have included had I been able to write more than the words that I did.
Yeah.
But if there was another book on the horizon, and maybe there is at some point, it would probably be around the psychological journey of selling a company and frankly the roller coaster that a lot of entrepreneurs go through after they sell, and finding a new purpose and finding a new chapter in their life. Like, that's an interesting field for, I think, a lot of entrepreneurs who have had an exit. They've got all the money they need, and yet they need purpose again. And so that's probably an interesting theme that a lot of folks, like the book Built to Sell ends, if you remember, it's a long time ago since you read it, I know, but Alex Stapleton just gets the wire transfer from his bank, and he gets the text saying, hey, like, what do you want me to do with all this money?
Yeah.
And like, he's just driving off into the distance in his Range Rover and just ignores the call because he knows the money's there and he doesn't need. So that's sort of an analogy in my mind to what I think a lot of entrepreneurs do, is they kind of drive away from their company, right?
Yeah.
And yet, if there's nothing they're going to, it can be a difficult transition. So I'd probably do something around that.
Yeah. Well, I just went back to the book and I reread that part of it. One of the words that I wrote down when preparing to talk to you was mindset, because I think that is such a big thing. Like, you hear the stories of people that have this end goal that they have with their business, and maybe it was to sell it, and they work so hard and then they sell the business. And the extreme example, right? Very sad, of people jumping off a bridge, right? Like, what do you do now? Right? What happens now? Everything you've worked towards, now that's gone. But there's so many subtleties in that. I was just thinking about, like, as I was asking that question about what would you add to the book? Well, you put out a book, and there's the book, it's behind you, and it's on Kindle, and it's in hardcover, and there's different versions of it. And then you release it. Well, then you, John, continue to go through all these iterations in your own life and all these different experiences, and you meet new people, and you're like, wow, I never thought of it that way, or I should have put recurring revenue in there more. There's a mindset just in that to say, did you get it all? Now, obviously you can't go back, and there's a mindset to that though. And right, do you see that? I mean, do you relate that a little bit to the conversations possibly that you're having with business owners and just in your life?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's a funny thing about writing a book is it's a very permanent thing, right? Like, you put a blog post out, it's like you can erase it. The shelf life is only a few days usually, but for a book, it's sort of this permanent thing. And so there's a little bit of performance anxiety, frankly. I think a lot of people go through where they're like, oh my gosh, I know this is going to be like a permanent record. So I think that's a challenge. But I think for a lot of entrepreneurs, those who are thinking about this journey of possibly building to sell, possibly going through some sort of transition, I'd have them listen to a podcast I did with a guy named Sean Oshman. Sean Oshman is episode 100 of Built to Sell Radio. The guy is It's a great story because it sort of described this kind of mindset shift. He woke up when he was 39 years old and he said, you know what? I've been living in landlocked Denver all my life and I actually crave water. And so he decided he wanted to live for the rest of his life on a sailboat by his 40th birthday. And so he's 39 and he has this little IT consulting company, a couple million in revenue, not a huge business, and he goes to a broker and he says, okay, help me sell this thing. Broker comes back with an offer of 2.6 times pre-tax profit and Sean accepts it. And I interviewed him on the show and I'm like, so 2.6 times profits, it's okay. It's a decent exit, but it's not like hitting it out of the park. It's not like a home run exit. And he said, yeah, but Sean, you don't really get it. I live on a sailboat.
Right.
And it was just his reminder to me. And I always come back to that because for me, that's a great reminder of Sean was going to something else, right? Like, yeah, he was selling his business and he wanted to get some money out of that, but he was also really excited about what was next. And so I think that helps entrepreneurs if they can really crystallize what it is they want to go do next.
Yeah, no, I think that's it. Like, what do you want? Because what one person's exit versus someone else, like you really can't compare because maybe there wasn't any other options, but it was the only option that he could get to get onto the sailboat. And it almost didn't even matter what that was. It was something that allowed him to buy the sailboat and go on and do the next thing. I think that's very well said. There's also something I think we have to address, and you've touched on this in your podcast, like built to sell. It's like, okay, I'm going to build a business and I'm going to sell the business, but that's really not what it's all about. Yes, that's absolutely a big part of it, but it's having a business. Because I always thought about what if I don't want to sell my business? What if there's something else that I want to do, or who knows what that is? But isn't it allowing yourself to have the freedom in your life to do the things that you want to do? Maybe you want to have that business and do other things. When we were talking before, like we had built an insurance company and I'm still involved with that insurance company, but not even close to like what I was before. I wouldn't have the ability to create a content marketing company if I was 100% day to day doing the insurance business. So I think there's a way to build a business, but perhaps not to sell it, but to have the freedom to do the things that you want to do. And I'll say this too, and this came from your book, not necessarily in like the theory of it, but I remember going out of town or going to my kid's school or going to do something with my wife, doing something that had really nothing to do with the business. Could my business exist for that day, for that week, if I wasn't there? Or was I coming back to just complete chaos? And of course, earlier on, you have to be more involved. But that's always been a test. Like, I'll go out of town and I'm never going to totally turn off, maybe at times, but you can let things happen. You can let things just take place. That I think is a big part, if you correct me if I'm wrong, in regards to your thoughts and your theories on built to sell.
Absolutely. I'll tell you a funny story. I was being interviewed on a podcast. This goes back years ago. And usually podcasts are pretty softball kind of questions. They're usually pretty fun, right? Like it's a relatively warm audience, if you will. And the guy starts off, no word of a lie. He's like, okay, yeah, Warrillow, you're the douchebag who wrote Built to Sell. And I'm like, wow, that's an opener. And he's like, yeah, and he went on to sort of chastise me for promoting this kind of building to flip Silicon Valley, start, sell, and ride off into the sunset kind of attitude. And I was so befuddled and totally put off by his opener that I did a crappy job of sort of rebutting him at the time. But since then, I've thought about it a lot. And I think you're absolutely right. Building to sell is not about how you sell your company. Built to sell is really about how do you create a business that doesn't need you, which is essentially the raw material, a prerequisite for having a sellable company, but it doesn't mean you need to sell. Oftentimes I'll do a talk, I'll go to an EO meeting and I'll be like, okay, so how do you guys want to sell your company? And if there's 100 people in the room, one hand might go up, right? Whereas if I ask the question, okay, how many of you would like to know that you could sell if and when you're ready? Virtually every hand goes up to that question. And so that's really what it's about. It's about, in your example, taking playing hooky and spending a day with your wife. That's a precious resource. That's an incredible luxury of owning a business, to kind of be able to sort of drift off for a day or two. No one notices, the business doesn't break down. And I think that is what I think we all crave, is that sense of freedom and independence. And I think that's really what Built to Sell is all about.
Yeah. And you could be a salesperson at a company and there's always these moments in time, let's say you go to a meeting. But when you're at that meeting, you're not selling. And you see it. And I saw it with myself. It's if I'm not doing those things, then there is no business today. Business is basically shut down. that is an eye-opening experience to know that, well, what if you couldn't work today? Whether it's because you're at a meeting, you want to do something else, but you can never do those something else's because you're always tied up in your business, or you just were sick, or whatever that might be. COVID hits. That's a scary proposition. I think there's just such an opportunity. Yeah, it comes with different stresses and new stresses when you do run a business, because you do have a lot of responsibility, to allow yourself the ability then to go out there and to build and create something. And then like even this, like build to sell, like in order to do that, well, then you have to build it the right way. You have to figure out what it is you're going to offer, because you talk about this is products and services. There's so many things you can offer. And I've done this as well is, oh yeah, we'll figure out a way to do that, right? You get into the marketing world. Oh my God, like you can sell anything in the market. And then people come to you. Do you do this? Do you, of course? Yeah, let's figure this out. And next thing you know, you're spread so thin. And then the team and the people and everyone else that's involved with it has a hard time keeping up. And then as an entrepreneur, you have ideas and, oh yeah, I can make that happen, right? And then you start realizing, what I've seen is my team would always say, I like white space. I like to declutter things. I want to get rid of it. And I'm constantly working at it. I'm by no means like an expert at it, but I'm constantly working and thinking through that. But in order to do that, you have to cut some stuff, right? So if you're going to offer products and services, I've seen it at restaurants. Restaurants you go to, the restaurants do very well when they have a certain selection of items on their menu. And then you go back a few years later and it's like, I don't know where to start. You know what? This is too confusing. It's like, what do you do with that? I want to talk a little bit about the products and services and offerings, because that's a big part of building to sell. Because when you offer too much, it's like, well, maybe too much of something is not a good thing.
Yeah. I mean, if you just think about it practically, why do businesses become dependent on their owner? It's generally because the owner is offering too many things. And the owner is oftentimes really comfortable in their skin. They understand the industry. They understand what customers need, and therefore are willing to offer lots of different things. Yet nobody can follow somebody like that. Like very few employees have the same industry experience you do, have the same expertise, even motivation that you will. And so the more things you offer, the more difficult it is for them to keep up. And so in a funny way, I think the most valuable companies are ones that sell a few things to lots of people. And the least valuable companies are the ones that sell lots of things to a few people. And I mean, I'll give you an example that I think it kind of illustrates that well, is a company called Breedlove and Associates, started by a woman named Stephanie Breedlove. She has a child. She wants to pay her nanny, and she calls up a payroll service, and it's like a terrible experience. And she's like, well, maybe I could just create a payroll company for parents who have a nanny to pay, because Paychex and ADP didn't want her business. So she thought, well, maybe I'll do that. So she starts it up, and she gets to $300,000 in revenue. It's just her and one employee. And she can't grow any further. She can't figure out how to grow any further. It's becoming more difficult for her to acquire customers. And there's like kind of two very divergent paths in front of her. One is what everybody is telling her to do, which is it's way easy to cross-sell existing customers, right? So you've got these parents, you do their payroll. Like what else do those parents need? Maybe they need like lawn care services and meal delivery services and all this other stuff, right? They've got disposable income, they're busy. The much more difficult road is the other side, right? Which is to go find more parents who have a nanny to pay. And to her credit, she did the latter. She decided that wasn't the purpose of her business to go do like lawn care for, she wanted to do payroll for nannies. And so she doubled down. She invested in sales and marketing. Anyways, long story short, 25 years later, all she does is payroll for nannies. And she approaches care.com, which is like, I don't know if you have it where you are, but it's like you plug in your zip code and it'll give you 5-star rated babysitters in your market, right? Well, at the time, Care had 7 million subscribers, 7 million people who had payroll to do. Stephanie Breedlove's company was doing $9 million in revenue on 10,000 customers. So they got 7 million. She's got 10,000. So Stephanie's like, hey, if 1% of your 7 million buy my payroll service, they all need it, by the way, because they're all people who are looking for a babysitter. That's 70,000 customers, a business like 7 times the size. Anyways, long story short, Stephanie sells Breedlove, this little $9 million company, for $54 million, like 6 times revenue. It's beyond any valuation model or metric you could possibly conceive of. But it was because when she reached that fork in the road at $300,000 in revenue, she did the hard thing, which was to double down on her existing value proposition. And she avoided the tempting, easy route, which was to go cross-sell a bunch of services.
How did she make that decision to say, I'm going to do this harder thing? Like, because some people, like, the harder thing might have been to do the other side of it, right? Like, which is the harder thing to do? It's harder from a mindset to say, I'm going to lose business by doing this. And you talk about that in your book. Like, what do you mean? We're only going to make, in the book, you talk about making logos. Well, if then we can't do websites, so we can't do whatever all these things are. We're going to focus on logos. You're like, we're going to lose a lot of customers by doing that. That is, like you're saying, that is the difficult thing. But there's a lot more work perhaps on the other side because you're going to have less work to do now that you have less customers. How did she know to say, right, it's like the two paths, and which path do you choose? And she chose this path and it ended up working out. Like, you don't know, right? I guess you just don't know. It's just something you think about. Did they read your book? Did she talk to you? How did she come to this decision makers that are around her or good people that could guide her? Like, where did she come up, perhaps, if you know, like with that decision to go that direction?
Yeah, I mean, Stephanie's an incredibly bright woman, so she would have done it all on her own. I think she realized that by focusing on one thing, she could get really good at that. She'd have a point of differentiation. You know, Warren Buffett talks about monopoly control, right? I want to invest in companies with a wide competitive moat. Why does he want to do that? It's because obviously when you've got competitive differentiation, you control your pricing a little bit, you can charge a little bit more. When you charge a little bit more, you get better margins, more you can invest in sales and marketing. And it kind of creates this domino effect. So what Breedlove realized, which is I think a lot of entrepreneurs should also kind of consider, is that for her to really create differentiation, she could only afford to do that in one area, which is payroll for nannies. And again, when you look at what an acquirer buys, like Care.com, they want to buy something they couldn't easily replicate. And so if you're in a bunch of service areas where it's kind of a Me Too product or a Me Too service, you're not really differentiated, an acquirer's not going to look at that and say, oh, I want to buy that company. They're going to say, nah, just drop the price and basically compete with them, right? The only time they decide to buy is when they're like, to replicate what she has done would take us many years and many millions of dollars. Therefore, it's probably just easy to buy it. And I think that's the kind of build versus buy decision they have behind closed doors. You're not there when they're making that decision, right?
Right.
And so having something that's really unique, it goes back to a mindset shift that I think a lot of entrepreneurs realize. Because in the early days, I think a lot of entrepreneurs are kind of would-be CEOs, right? What do CEOs chase? They chase revenue, they chase profitability, chase quarterly targets. And so their whole headspace is like, I'm going to drive this business forward. I'm going to be a rainmaker. I'm going to grow this company. And top line revenue is going to be our ultimate sort of yardstick as to how we're doing. So we're going to apply for the Inc. 5000, right? We're going to get into the Inc. 5000 because that's the 5,000 fastest growing companies. And of course, that leads people to do a lot of things that aren't necessarily building the value of their company. It leads to chasing revenue, cross-selling, et cetera. I encourage people to take a different view. Instead of thinking of your role as the CEO and founder of your company, I actually encourage people to think of their role as the parent of their company. And you're a dad, so I think you probably can relate. I mean, if I asked you, like, what do you want your kids to be like in 20 years? How would you answer that?
Yeah, no, I mean, when you're saying that, it makes a lot of sense because you want them to be able to go off and make their own decisions, right?
Right.
Think for themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. Be successful without you holding their hand.
Yeah. And you want to be there and maybe to watch and do all, we're still going to go out to dinner, I hope, and all that, those good things.
Yeah.
And but absolutely. That's a good way to look at it.
Yeah. I mean, like when I think about myself, I'm a parent as well. And it's become, our kids they're into high school and thinking about college and all that jazz. And I think some parents want their kid to go to Harvard. That's not my aspiration. If my kids both go on to be successfully functional adults who are happy and independent in their lives and enjoying whatever they choose to do as a career, a mission accomplished as far as I'm concerned, check the box. And I think if more people thought of their job as not the CEO of their company, but as like the mom or dad of their company, and that the ultimate objective is to get this little girl or little boy to kind of get on their own 2 feet, out the door, and successful without you. And I think it just leads to different decision making. And I think it can be ultimately a much more valuable company if that's the sort of approach you think about.
Yeah. And just going back into the mindset, right? In the psychological journey, perhaps that people are on to make these difficult decisions. And how do you think about it? Because you want to hold it so tight, whether it's your baby or your business and whatever that is something that you created different ways, right? Obviously different examples, but you always want to be there for it. And then you also have this, like you talked about before, you said Harvard, or if it's a business, it's a different product offering, or it's a valuation, or it's the Inc. 500. There's this ego that plays out because you're like, and you want to showcase like what you've built and what you're doing. And those things are very important. And then ego just doesn't want to deal with reality, I think. And then it's like, if you have that ego enough time in your head, it's like you can't break away from it that easily. And so what do you do? Like, how do you break away from that? Because you talk about freedom and having, like, I think you've asked this question before. Would you rather have the ego or would you rather have the freedom? And you're like, oh, wow, I never thought of it that way. I want freedom. But it's difficult, I think, for people, especially in business, when there's a lot of one-upping going on. There's a lot of talk going on. And I don't know if it matters, right?
Yeah.
And you want to talk about the business exit, right? And it's like, well, how much did you sell for? And there's a lot of ego in that, as opposed to having this peace from your own mind that you're happy with what it is that you're doing, or not happy, but this is what you want to be doing. It's not always happy, right? You got to pay taxes. You got to do these things. I always say it's like, well, it's real happy. You're walking down the street and you're having a great day and you trip and fall and sprain your ankle. Like, there's nothing happy about that. But what are you going to do about it, right? Like, are you in a good place? Can you deal with that and move on and keep walking? Ego is a big deal when it comes to all of these things. And you can't just apply it to like this one aspect. It's like, it's prevalent everywhere. And it's a big deal when you're talking about building a business and the top 40, under 40, whatever those different things are. Those are big ego strokes for a lot of people. And they can be important for some people. And I understand that. But what is it like when it comes to building your business and having ego? And again, even not losing a customer, going back to that example of like, can you do this for me? Yes, we can do that. We'll figure it out. Because you have this ego of you don't want to lose that customer. And I think the ego can get in the way of saying, oh man, we went down another path. Like, how can we go down 6 different paths at the same time? We can really only go down one path, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's incredibly dangerous cocktail of emotions that are in the human ego. Look, it's not just susceptible to people who are running their business day to day. Like, I think if you want to feel an ego boost and a sudden rush of adrenaline, like make a sale, right? Like, you will feel really good about yourself. If you want to feel really amazing and up at another level altogether, is watch one of your salespeople make a sale without your involvement. If you want to feel like incredible, that's like almost one of the most incredible feelings in the world for an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
To sit back and watch somebody else make a sale without you. That's delicious. That is something I could run on for a lot of miles. I feel like that is incredible to feel that way. And I think, again, it comes back to what you're trying to do. If you're trying to fill your own soul, your own ego with, I can make a sale, I got that customer, then you're going to limit, I think, the growth of your business to a point where you're the kind of king of a small village. Whereas if you can suddenly get that same adrenaline rush from getting other people to do the work and other people to be successful, man, that's totally another level altogether. So I think it's a biggie.
That's like your child example right there, when your kid can go out and do something and you can watch it take place. And that beats it all, right? And it's like, wow, look at you becoming a man, becoming a woman, like doing these different things. And you're right. It's like we were talking before, we started creating content. We have these podcasts, and now we help other entrepreneurs, founders create their podcast. And then you watch this journey they go on. I got like this path to better content. And they come back at some point, and it's struggle and it's hard, and they're putting themselves out there and they're saying things out loud that they've never really said before. And then you watch them and you're like, they're enjoying this so much. That's the rush that you're talking about. It's in a different way, but it's the same type of thing. It's probably no different than when you work with a business owner and they go through this exit that they were just so excited about. And you help them in some small way get to that point. And you're in the background just excited for them, right? And you've talked about a few different people today. And I know you've been a part of it, like whether they read your book or you had consultations with them, you're excited for them. I think you're right. And I think when you see it from that standpoint, there's something special in that. And I want to talk about content, because here you are, like, you got all these books, you have your own podcast, you're appearing on other podcasts. Here you are talking to me on podcasts. And obviously you've talked about sales and marketing quite a bit. And you're talking about just telling these different stories. Like, what's it been for you with creating content? Why are you on all these podcasts? Why are you doing these things in your business? Because you clearly know what it's like to build a business and to sell a business and to create a business that doesn't necessarily need you on a day-to-day. Like, why are you out here doing all this content?
Yeah, I mean, I think on a personal level, I own a company called Value Builder, and we have a president, Sam, who runs that company. And so professionally, that frees me up to do things that I like. I happen to like this topic. I think it's something that I do this Built to Sell Radio podcast where I interview these entrepreneurs who've exited. I enjoy it. Like I genuinely love listening to their stories, hearing all the sort of forks in the road. So I think there's a sense of I've gotten the business to a point where I can sort of pick and choose the stuff that I'm interested in. I like to write. I actually, believe it or not, have thought about doing some fiction writing. I actually enjoy intrinsically writing. So there's a kind of component to that. I enjoy conversations on this topic for podcasts. So I think it's indulgent of me to sort of, I'm not pouring through spreadsheets to try to figure out ClickFunnels. Like I'm fortunate to have some team members that do that stuff. So it does allow me to kind of pull back and say, like, what do I like doing? I like writing, I like talking. So it's not some grand master plan or some big strategic, like, let's get John out there on podcasts, sort of strategic plan. It's a little bit more like, what do I like to do? What am I decent at? That kind of stuff.
Yeah. Well, that's the freedom we talk about, right? When you build a business that allows you to do the things that you want to do, right? And that's what I've seen, the same thing, like having this conversation when your people reach out to us, it's like, yeah, I want to talk to John. That would be amazing. And then there's like, you get to have these conversations with these people and learn from it. And who knows what comes from it, right? It doesn't have to be anything, but I do know this, that I'm having a conversation with you and I'm taking notes and I'm thinking about it and I'm applying it. And well, there's a huge benefit there. There's a benefit in the people on my team that get to listen to this podcast or potential people we want to hire down the road. I think content can do all of these things. And there's just these unknowns. Like, I think you talked about this before of, when someone, before they're like running the business, perhaps they were in sales at some point and they're selling a product or a service. Well, you're possibly selling the company. You don't know the next person that you're going to talk to might be the person be like, I would like to talk to you about buying your business, right? Like that's the extreme. And that's something, maybe it doesn't work exactly like that. It gets many different levels to get to some point like that. But you're just having conversations in an in-depth way and opening the door. Do you see content, or like you talk about selling a business, do you see the value in content towards the business and perhaps in their exit? Like, are you seeing that businesses are more valuable when they have not necessarily a podcast, but just content in general? I mean, you look at it from many different perspectives. Is there more value to a business if they've built a content platform?
Yeah. Look, one of the 8 drivers we talk a lot about is this thing we referenced earlier called monopoly control, which is where you've built something unique that is hard to compete with. And content is one of the ways that people really create some unique turf, some blue ocean, or whatever you want to describe it, something that makes them unique. And it's difficult with content to steal it. It's difficult if you've got a unique point of view or you've developed a significant library of your own content. It's somewhat difficult for people to kind of replicate it. So I think to the extent that content differentiates you, I think it can be a big driver in the value of your company. It's got to do that though, right? Like it can't just be content for content's sake. It's got to serve to differentiate the brand. And I think where owners need to think about it, and certainly we talk a lot about it, but Value Builder is trying to draw the distinction between promoting your company and developing content that helps support your company and developing your own personal brand. A personal brand is a liability when it comes to the sale of your company. It's something that will cause you to have to, to agree to an earn-out, and like the NCAA rules right now are like using your likeness in advertising. Like it's a problem for your company if you create this giant personal brand. Whereas if you develop your content to support a company, like for example, at Value Builder, we have a whole series of ebooks. Well, they're not branded with my name on them, right? That's intentional. We have a whole kind of content strategy around Value Builder, which is very kind of intentional to separate me from the company I happen to own, if that makes sense.
It does. Yeah. And then the other aspect of it gets into ROI, because like, right, you're going to have this podcast, you're going to do all these things. Like it's probably very difficult for you or your team to measure what is the return? What do we get from John doing this podcast? What do we get from like having your own? And like a book, you can say, hey, we wrote the book, we put it on Amazon, we put it in Barnes and Noble, here's how many copies that we sold, here's how much we made from that book. And there's other aspects of that book too that can lead to things. Here, we're talking about this book, 10 years after it was initially published. Well, there's constant things that you can look at, but what is the true ROI of a conversation or an article that you put on your website? Like that's very difficult for an owner to understand. It's very difficult for a buyer to really get their hands on, but they can understand that the content's there and you can feel it. How much of the aspect you get into, like the goodwill maybe of a business, as opposed to like, just give me the hard numbers on what this business looks like.
Yeah, it's very true. I mean, of course, you can measure downloads if you have ebooks or whatever, but you're right. There is this sort of swallow hard and assume that it's working, but it's not always linear. Was it David Ogilvy, who said, like, I know 50% of my advertising is working. I just don't know which 50%.
Right,
Was that David Ogilvy?
I think maybe, yeah. That's a good one.
He has some great one-liners, but that's the essence of developing this content, is that you sort of have this view that it's working, but you're not able to always put your finger on exactly why or what it is. So I think that's an issue.
It's something that we're always thinking about, right? That someone's always thinking about it, which aspect of it is working. And the last piece is recurring revenue. We touched on it here a little bit. And there's recurring revenue in many different things. And like you said, it's, I think, for a business to have a better acquisition, let's say, to have a product that is recurring, right? That can always have it. And you touch on many different ways to do this. I think there's two sides of it, right? Because I can give some personal examples, like an HVAC company. They're very good about signing you up for their $48 or $50 per month program to service your HVAC units until they're not doing a good job with it, right? They got you on the hook for the $50, but they're not taking care of it. And that's a struggle because you can get so many clients in that way. But at the same time, it's super important to have that type of business that's ongoing. But maybe that's obvious, right? That's the obvious thing. Like, we hope your business is good. If not, you're going to lose your customers. You're going to have an unsuccessful business is that. But recurring revenue is something that you've clearly talked about. You said before, like, if you were to go back in 2010 or whenever you were really writing this book, to talk more about recurring revenue. And we've seen it play out because it's easier nowadays too to do recurring revenue just with the online tools that someone has to easily set that up. It doesn't have to be in paper and all that. It's very easily done. But recurring revenue, like, seems to be something that you're very focused on today.
Absolutely. Because it drives the value of your company. I mean, it's a huge driver. Dollar for dollar, if you've got recurring or subscription-based or contractual revenue, it can be worth like a multiple of your transactional revenue. Like in the security business space, installation revenue, the kind of revenue they get from installing the security system, trades for about 75 cents for every dollar of revenue. Whereas if you look at the monitoring revenue those security companies get to call the cops if there's a fire or whatever, they get about $3 for every dollar of monitoring revenue. Said another way, that monitoring revenue, the recurring revenue in the security business, is like 4x,
Wow.
4 times more valuable in your transaction. So it's a big, big deal. And I think we're seeing industries all around us that are migrating to recurring revenue. I heard of dentists doing one the other day. My favorite recently has been car washes. This has been a transformation that's been going on for a couple of years, but we used to go to the car wash. It was a transaction, right? You buy gas, your car wash, it was like $20. Nowadays, you can subscribe to unlimited car washes. And I actually gave a talk. I get all the sexy gigs. I gave a talk at the International Car Wash Association or something.
I believe it.
And I was describing the benefits of these sort of subscription models where you get like an all-you-can-eat car wash, like you can go as many times as you want. And a guy in the audience kind of put his hand up and said, yeah, but you don't understand. Like, that costs money every time they go through the car wash. There's hot water, there's soap and stuff like that. And what if we do this and like these guys are going to come in every day? And like, I was kind of like, well, first of all, most people have better things to do with their time than just get the car washed. So I wouldn't worry too much about that. But the other thing that, and this is sort of the secret of recurring revenue models, and again, what I would coach the HVAC guy you referenced in your earlier comments, is that if you can jam pack the first 30 days of your relationship with a new subscriber with tons of value, their likelihood to stay long-term is kind of through the roof. It's like the moment in truth, the honeymoon period where they define in their own minds the value of the relationship. And so if you stuff tons of value, if that car comes in 8 times in that first month for a free car wash, guess what? You're underwater in that month. You're not making money. But because he or she felt value in that first month, it is much more likely that they stay many years into the future. And the inverse is not true. If you kind of bobble the ball, put a limit on how many times they can come in their first month, for example, and then look at the statistics of how long they stay, they're out the door and they churn at a much higher rate because they didn't get value. And so packing as much value into that first month as you possibly can, if your goal is to move to a recurring revenue model, is going to be critical.
Yeah, I've heard that like in the restaurant business, if you've shown up to the restaurant 3 times early on, like the chances that you're going to stay long-term are, I don't know what the numbers are, but it's really high. I was just thinking, I was at a restaurant recently and food started off great. And then the food took forever to come out. No one really made a big deal about it. And it was like, I've been wanting to go there and we're just turned off by it. And so I don't know if I go back. If they recognize that hey, this is our first time there, then, hey, come back next time, and the second time, and the third time. And they have ways of like figuring out like different color napkins is a perfect way. Hey, have you been with us before? No, give them a red napkin. They know it's your first time. Second time, they give them a different. Yeah. So you could do these different things. And you see it too with like these online subscriptions, whether it's content or an email newsletter. Early on, if you just don't see the value, it's very easy to unsubscribe. It's always easy to unsubscribe, but it's very easy to do that early on because you're like, I signed up, I don't like it, delete, and you move on. But once you're in, it's like you almost have this connection with it to where you're just going to keep getting it. And I think so. It's like to your point that it's very important to hit it off. That doesn't mean though, like I see this as well, like landscaping companies. I think they're terrific for the first couple of months or maybe even the first year. But it's like later on when they get a little too big for themselves and the owners spread too thin and whatever else. And it's basically a subscription model. They just have to keep coming back and doing it, but they lose it. And then you have to fire them. And then you got to get to another company and just rinse and repeat constantly. And I just don't see the company out there that's really figured it out yet, at least in our area. But that's another one where I think early on, it's great to pack it all in for those first 30 days, but it is equally important, right? To have a consistent business that your customers are saying good things about because the reviews are going to be out there, that you still have to have value. And I know you're not saying not to give it up after 30 days, but it's just very important in the first 30 days that you show them like what they're going to get when they're a customer of yours.
Absolutely. And I think entrepreneurs who do a great job of codifying the experience that they would provide a customer. When I say codifying, I mean articulating it, describing it, labeling it, naming it, and then institutionalizing it. In other words, communicating to all your staff that this is the way we serve customers. Like a stupid example, Ritz-Carlton has the $800 free license, which is basically any employee from the chambermaid to the front desk clerk. If they can solve a problem for a customer under $800, they have permission to do that. So it's branded. It's the $800 sort of solution, and everybody knows they're entitled to it. At Zappos, as an example, the late Tony Hsieh had the two-way return guarantee. He did not let people go to voicemail trees. They picked up live, right? So you always get a live person within 4 rings. That's the way Tony would have dealt with a customer, right? And he wanted that everyone through his company, the thousands of employees he had, did it Tony's way. And in order to do that, without getting a lobotomy and being Tony Hsieh, you have to give them these service experiences. Again, you have to name them, you have to describe them, ideally brand them, hardwire them, so that it's not like you're not telling your employees like, offer great customer service, or here at ABC Widgets, we give great customer service. That's nebulous. That means things to different people. But if you say all our shoes are sold with a two-way guarantee, in other words, we're going to pay not only to ship them to you, yet if you don't like them, we will pay to ship them back. Like that's demonstrable. It's making quote unquote good customer service tangible. And I think many owners struggle to make this bridge because they personally offer great customer service. And they haven't done the heavy lifting to think, okay, what do I do to give great customer service? And they get frustrated when their employees don't. And they're like, we offer great customer service. Why didn't you treat that customer well? And it's like, well, I can't read your mind. And so trying to make service tangible and real for people with these sort of hardwired offerings, I think is a really...
It is. And it's funny you said that because I remember at this company I was at last, there's a sign, there's this woman holding a globe and it said world-class customer service. And I'm like, That's bullshit, because I've been here for a long time to know that our world-class customer service is the worst it's ever been.
Right.
And I mean, I even had leaders in the company tell me, I'm sorry, the service is not good. We know it's not good. We can do our best to not make it any worse. I'm like, that's a terrible answer. I can't be here. Like this, my customers, my clients see this. I have personal relationships with them. They're the ones seeing it, and I basically feel it for them. And so I can't be a part of it. And then when you have your own business, like you talk about Zappos, the idea of like, I think they put them through their training program, right? And they offer them money to leave, to don't work here. And if you're willing to take that money, that you weren't going to be a fit at that company anyway. Like it's much easier to walk that person out the door because if they don't get the value of it, then it's not going to work out. No, I think that's fascinating. I love that. John, obviously your books, they're available on Amazon. You talked about your company. Where can people get a hold of you, learn more about you, and read and listen to more of your content?
I think the best place to go is builttosell.com/perspectives. which we've actually put together some gifts for your listeners. That there's a video series there. There's a white paper they can download about the subscription models they can adopt with a checklist on 9 different ones. And there's like an ebook that corresponds with the book, The Art of Selling Your Business, which is a workbook that you can go through. So it's all just builttosell.com/perspectives.
I love that. I think it's awesome too, because we've had people come on and here's some different things that they've given away or the book that they've had. And we'll have people reach out and send me an email and be like, hey, where can I get the download? Can you resend me the link or what book of theirs should I? And that's huge, right? And that's what it's all about. And I think it's also just makes a difference to say, I mean, I read your book. I pay attention to what you're creating. The fact that you're on this podcast, I mean, that's the reason why I do this. I could never have imagined that I'd be talking to you, whatever it was, like 7, 8, 9 years later, and having this conversation and getting really to pick your brain on what it is that you're thinking through and just the dynamic conversation that you just, there's no real agenda. It's just really going through a conversation and or see where we land or don't land and just keep thinking from there. So John, I appreciate your time, your energy, the fact that you wrote this book, that you're sharing this content, you're still out there and you're still doing it. And obviously have a ton of passion for it. And it's a big deal. I'm excited. My business partner, he gets involved in the M&A world and he does a lot of different things. And when I started a business, I realized that I don't know how to run a business quite yet. And I didn't want to wait around to have, I don't know what you say, success. I didn't want to wait around to just start making things happen. I needed someone there that could help me to, like, we had the cash register, we had the menu, we had the different things. We could start serving food immediately. We're not a restaurant, right? But we could start doing those things immediately. And that was important. I see that whether it's reading your book or the E-Myth or a lot of these other books that I've come across. It's a big deal. So thank you for everything that you do, John. I really appreciate it.
Oh, it's very generous of you. My pleasure.
One of my favorite things about CADSource is the opportunity to chat with amazing business leaders and entrepreneurs. We hope you enjoyed the conversation. If you want to connect, you can find me on LinkedIn or visit us at cadsource.com. Thank you for listening to this CADSource production, Entrepreneur Perspectives, building and protecting your business one podcast at a time. Content Matters with a Z is our content marketing company that helps entrepreneurs tell their own stories to those who care. And here's the thing. We think every entrepreneur that is willing should have their own content platform. And we want to help make that happen, both by working directly with entrepreneurs and by sharing our own stories, exploring the craft of content marketing. Content Matters, one piece of content at a time. Learn more at CAScontent.com.